said he might come. Yeah. Well, we have sat in the pitch black. I think we're ready. We're ready. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to this evening's Planning Board meeting. It is Wednesday, November 9th, a little after 7 p.m., so we're going to get underway this evening. We have a relatively light agenda this evening, so hopefully we can move through things and give things the time they need this evening. Because our first public hearing isn't scheduled until 7:15, we will wait on that one. And before we get underway, just a quick note on attendance. We are missing member Tom Kent this evening. So just let the record show that we have our board in attendance with the exception of member Kent. The first item I think we'll take up is just an update on the master plan. The master plan steering committee, along with members of the community, have been hard at work on our visioning statement. We did have a community forum mid-October on a Saturday. We had a great attendance, and I think a lot of great discussion about what our vision is for Braintree in 2033 and beyond. We actually have our next master plan steering committee meeting coming up on November 17th at 6 p.m. in this room right here. We are going to be hopefully able to discuss the vision statement that we will be settling in on as we move forward into the next phases of the master plan. And we're going to be kind of talking about the community input that we had on the first version of the vision statement. And I think it's going to be a very engaging conversation. I would hope that members of this board and people watching will come to that meeting. I think it's going to have a lot of substance, and it's going to be very pivotal for our movement into the future of what we want to do as a community. So if you do have time on the 17th, schedule us in. And then, of course, we also will be hosting a joint meeting in December, I believe, with Town Council and the Planning Board. Since the Planning Board is the entity that is kind of creating this master plan and will officially be putting it forward to the Town Council, we're going to host a joint meeting in December to discuss just kind of where we're at and bring the two boards together. So again, I think that's going to be another great opportunity for a lot of the working entities around town to kind of come together and cross paths specifically on the master plan. So another meeting to put on your agenda to check out. And the third reminder on the master plan update is that the public comment period for the existing conditions report is open right now and live. So if you're able to go onto the master plan website, you can access the existing conditions report, which the consultant pulled together. It's based on their review of a lot of old, master plan documents, related documents that the town has in its history books. It's a compilation of the survey data. It's the compilation of a lot of the meetings in a box that we had. So it's really, it's a fascinating snapshot at where we are as a community right now, but It may not be exactly reflective of community members, so we're really encouraging people to go read it, see if anything jumps out. The consultant, I think, is very well equipped to write that report for us, but they don't live in Braintree. So I encourage you to check it out, read it, and if you do have suggestions, please send them over to, I believe you can send them right to the planning director, Ms. Santucci-Razzi, and she can collect them and share them with the consultant. We're trying to collect those by November 14th, and this just kind of gives us time for the consultant to incorporate that into what will be the existing conditions final sort of piece as we move forward through the master plan. And a lot of work has been going on this, both at these community meetings and behind the scenes, and maybe some stuff I missed. So Director Santucci-Razzi, do you have anything to add or anything you'd like to point out with regards to the master plan and what's been going on?
Thank you, Madam Chair. No, I think you did a great job. I would just, again, really encourage, especially the planning board members, to come out. If you can't make it on the 17th, please come on December 15th. We're going to post that as a triple board meeting. The official body will be the Master Plan Steering Committee, but we really want to make sure that we're sort of checking in as we move along in the process and continue to get feedback from both the planning board and the council members, as well as the public in general. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. So the joint meeting that's held in December is in addition to our normal public hearing date. Do you have the date on our December meeting? 13th. The 13th, okay. So we'll be seeing a lot of each other in December.
Yep, Tuesday the 13th,
Okay.
and then this meeting would be December 15th on Thursday.
Perfect. Is there any questions from members of the board on the process, the master plan process? Any feedback? I don't know if any of you were able to attend the community forum last month, but any thoughts on that or anything you'd like to add?
No, I think you all are doing a great job. I made it there. It was a beautiful day, and I was really surprised and encouraged by how many people were out at that event.
Yeah. Do you know, Director Santucci-Razzi, how many people we had in attendance at that event?
On that one, we had just over 100. We had a little bit less than last time, but there were some new faces, and that's really, really hopeful to, that we're reaching more and more people, and they're tapping in, doing the survey, and really getting into the process. So it was a beautiful day, and I think there were some competing town events, but there were people that stopped in and couldn't stay and came a little late and vice versa. So it was maybe a little bit more than 100, but I would say about 100.
Yeah, it was a great turnout. All right, and we have on our agenda a link to the Braintree Master Plan website where you can find a lot of this information and the existing conditions report. So please take advantage of that. The next item I'm going to take up is on the old new business section of our agenda. We have approval of meeting minutes. We have the August 9th, 2022 meeting minutes and the October 11th, 2022 meeting minutes. And I will say those August meeting minutes are a novel. So kudos to Louise for plugging through that.
Yeah.
That's a lot
She's been cranking away. I told her tonight she could chill at home and watch and take the notes from there,
Yeah.
given it was going to be a lighter night.
Yeah, so we just need a motion to approve those minutes if there's no changes required.
Madam Chair, if we can just take those separately,
Okay.
just because Member Conley wasn't with us in October.
All right, so we need a motion on the approval of the August meeting minutes.
So moved.
We have a motion by Member McCamey. Do we have a second?
Second.
Second by Member Grove. All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? And then we need a separate motion on the approval of the meeting minutes for the October 11th meeting.
So moved.
Do-
Second.
A second by Member Grove. All those in favor? Aye. All those opposed? And anyone abstaining? Member Connolly's abstaining from that. Great. We also have with us this evening, favorite time of the year, the a 2023 Planning Board meeting schedule. It is always hard to imagine sitting here in November of next year that we know the date. We did have one member note that the February 14th meeting is on Valentine's Day. I don't know if we do have any, and I know it is nice to spend that time with like your family. So is it possible to move the date, or what can we do with that one?
Yeah, I think obviously, if the board is fine with changing the date from, it would be to Wednesday, the
Yeah.
15th. I don't think that's a problem, and I don't think that Wednesday is a problem for this room either.
Yeah. I would be in favor of making that change. So I think aside from that, I don't have any other comments with the meeting dates. Member McCamey, do you have any? Member Crod, any comments?
No, I know that I'll likely have a conflict in July, but I think keeping the consistent date
Yeah,
makes sense.
yeah. Member Grove, do you have any conflicts you know of? Member Connolly, any conflicts or anything you know of? Okay. All right, so I guess with that, with noting that the February date will be the 15th, we just need a motion to approve the meeting dates for 2023.
Move to approve the 2023 meeting schedule. Second.
Second by Member Grove. All those in favor? Aye. All those opposed? Thank you.
And just to note, Madam Chair, Member Crowe, you will be absent in July. We just like to take notes when we know ahead of time. Okay, and Member Conley, June, correct? Okay, awesome. Well, we have an alternate now, so and we have the Mullen Rule, so we can work around that a little bit easier than before. Thank you.
Thanks. It is 7:15, so I'm going to move into the continued public hearings section of our agenda. The item on our agenda this evening, the only item on our agenda for our public hearings, is Town Council Order Number 22-012, which is a zoning ordinance text amendment, a new section for inclusionary housing as put forward by the mayor's office. We have been discussing this on and off through a series of live public hearings and continuances. So this evening is just a reminder that, we're still in the format of an open public hearing. So if you are here from the public and you wish to ask any questions or make any commentary with regards to the zoning ordinance that we're discussing, please feel free to come up to the podium and just introduce yourself and ask questions away. Not seeing anybody here from the mayor's office, I'm just going to ask staff if they could just give us an overview of the update on the zoning bylaw that has occurred since the last meeting, and I guess just any general staff level updates or anything you'd like to add before we kind of open it up to commentary from the board.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I apologize for not being here last month. I was able to watch from YouTube, not realizing it was on a slight delay, so I just kind of tuned in and kept quiet to avoid, being, you guys are on to something else and I'm still asking this question. So I had prepared for the last meeting some revisions primarily to the percentage categories and sort of scale of how we're going to slide up from 10% to 15%. Noting that the smaller projects would be at 10%, 11 to 50 units, 51 to 75 units would be at 12.5%, and over 76 units or greater would be at 15%. That was really the bulk change in the last revision, as well as a housekeeping item that I missed in 705, and that was, again, taking out the apartment house, two-family, and putting in the multifamily word, and also eliminating the commercial zoning district reference in 705. What I issued yesterday was a few minor revisions that are for clarity only. I want to thank Member Conley for her read. It's always good to have multiple eyes on ordinances to ensure that the intended language is how the reader also views that upon their read. So the first thing that was changed was in the purpose of 135-616. And what we did there was we defined better moderate income, and that's greater than 50% and up to 80% of the AMI. That was the first item. The second item is down in C3 under the selection process and spelling out affirmative fair housing marketing plan. And also noting our assistant solicitor has asked me to further clarify that, noting pursuant to DHCD in that paragraph. So again, just clarifying what it is and sort of the originator of that document. And then in number 5, building permit and occupancy conditions under A, we defined our department. So before I had just DPCD, Department of Planning and Community Development, so now we've defined that. Another good thing, again, DHCD, DPCD, somebody might say, oh, they typed that wrong or something like that. So again, more language to clarify, and that pretty much is the extent of the revisions to date. The revision in the percentages, I feel as though is something that is definitely palatable. That is something that introduces a lower threshold for smaller projects, and then larger projects, those that are familiar with development, the bigger the project, the more money in the project, the more flexibility, and just in general, more money to essentially cover the cost associated with these units. And that pretty much is the bulk of the changes. Obviously available for any questions that anybody has. And I want to thank the board members for their comments. I know Member Crowe had some comments at the last meeting as well. All very good comments, and we just continue to refine and tighten. At this point, I think what is presented is a good document. It's a good ordinance. It is something that is going to allow Braintree. We're very close to meeting our 10%. The Windjammer units are all online. That regulatory agreement has been recorded. That's 73 units. I will be preparing the forms to submit to DHCD. They call them new unit forms. And those units will also be added. And then the second piece, getting us over that 10% threshold, is the wind development at 44 Allen Street. And they're pursuing their DHCD funding this round here into the fall. It's like now, but it's January. They call it the fall round. So both exciting. Both efforts that have been undertaken in conjunction with the administration, this board, and the department. And this ordinance, in the current way that it's drafted, will ensure that as we move forward, that we sort of protect the hard work that we've done. That's really, we've met, we're very close now, and we're going to be meeting that. And we had situations back when I started all this back in the 2000s where, again, we were at 10%, and we did not put this in place, and we lost that safe harbor. So hopefully this can get on the books, and then we can continue the discussions around housing in the community through the master planning process, whether that results in some other recommendations that go into our implementation plan. While that is going on, this is something that can serve as a protection to the town as we continue these efforts locally. Thank you.
Great, thank you. As a follow-up question on I noted one of the changes was a modification on the greater than 50% and up to 80% of the AMI added to the first purpose to increase the housing stock. Is there any sort of requirement, or like there's different levels of affordability? So like a unit may be provided for a 50% AMI or different levels of that. Is there anything, and I think most often the affordable units are more targeted to the 80% AMI. So how, I guess, was there any like consideration, like when a unit becomes affordable, like how do you get like 50% AMI versus 80% AMI? It's mentioned there, but I didn't know like where else that would fall into the
Right.
bylaw.
So this actually is not a revision as much as I added in those numbers.
Yeah.
So that people know. And there's terms that planners and people use every day and they know the meanings, but it's always nice to really clarify things. So if you took, I don't know, 9.5 out of 10 inclusionary ordinances, you will see most people target 80% of AMI. I have seen some ordinances that require a certain percentage at 65 and a certain percentage it's at or below 80. And in this particular case, that's kind of that window, greater than 50 and less than 80, would allow, if we wanted to try to negotiate a greater affordability level, or that was something that was on the table. For example, Wynn, in their project, they're providing that. They have some at 30% and some at 65 and some at 80. So different projects, different type of the Wynn project, and I'll use that as an example because it's a fresh example and everybody's familiar with it. That is a deeply subsidized tax credit project that has, I mean, just tons of subsidies, and they're going into these DHCD rounds for this specific type of funding that is really set out for that sort of varying levels of income. In a traditional development, or even in a 40B, you're targeting the 80% of AMI, and that's sort of what DHCD sort of sets out as their parameters for inclusion in the subsidized housing inventory, which is how you get to your 10%. So I think that targeting the 80 at or below 80% with the option to negotiate at 65 is something that this would allow for.
So like who would negotiate for like the 65%? I'm more curious as we shake through this master planning process and we're looking at house burdened families and what the cost of living in Braintree is, like if we decide, like if we came to the conclusion through the master planning process that we really needed to have housing available at a 65% AMI, like would this help us, would this bylaw help us get there, or would that be more something that would have to be negotiated through a different avenue?
This doesn't specifically say a certain percentage at that, and I think that when you start to look at the different types of developments that could come forward, you would be looking at sort of what's the target population, where is this located, who are they actually trying to serve, and then determining where is the need in that specific population. I'll use elderly, for example. Or senior housing, you typically see those lower thresholds. In something that is more family housing, you would see more at the 80% of AMI. So it's really kind of where is it, who you're trying to serve, what's the population, and really what's the need, and how can we best serve that need through providing units at varying incomes.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, we realize it's an incredibly complex issue, and I am very happy to see these discussions starting to happen and to see the mayor's office put forward an inclusionary housing bylaw, which I think we all really, or I personally stand behind the purpose of these sections, the purposes section to increase the supply of affordable housing stock, encourage greater diversity of housing accommodations, and keep up with the SHI inventory. So I'm excited about this conversation. I don't want to take up all the time. So Member McCamey, do you have any questions, comments, thoughts? Do you want to?
Sure. Thank you. We've been thinking about this for a long time, and I am in recent receipt of a report from the City of Malden, which was published in 2021, and they did an analysis on affordable housing. And when I've perused it and I have it, I'm going to make it available to the director and the rest of the board. She can distribute it. But when I saw it, it was enlightening because it occurred to me that this is exactly what we need. It was a thorough analysis. They did it with some consultants. They had a variety of different people on the committee. And what it gave you was, and we can certainly use a lot of it, is it gave you specific facts, data, and a financial analysis. So one of the things that's troubled me about this proposed ordinance is, I don't know if it works financially. We've never done any analysis on that. And my second point would be, we're in a period right now where the inputs to any financial model are changing very rapidly. And what I mean by that is interest rates, commodity prices, and land values in terms of supply and demand. And I just don't see, I mean, these might be the right numbers, but I think what I've been searching for is, hard facts, data, and again, numbers. In the Malden report, they actually give internal rates of return to developers, and that's what we need to know. We need to know is if a project in Braintree is going to go forward, people say, well, why don't we have senior housing? Why don't we have this and that? Because maybe it doesn't make financial sense. And I think until we have the data and the analysis, you can't answer that question. So, and again, we're in a period where it's changing very rapidly, and probably in a negative way. So, I've advocated before for better analysis. I think, like I said, there's some other things in there in the Malden report, fees in lieu of, that's not my expertise. Maybe Member Conley and maybe Crowe, they know more about that, the director, but there's other things, and the other thing I liked about their report was they did a sensitivity analysis for a range of the different variables. That's what we need to have. You can't bank on one number. That's what you would do in the real world. That's, I'm sure, what Wynn has been doing. Other developers, they have to make some money. Otherwise, we're not going to get good projects. So if we put this in, my fear is if we put something in like this in a rushed manner, what if you had a party and nobody came? And it's going to be strictly on the financials, I think. And then, how does that fit in with our objectives? So my last point is that I think that this belongs with the master plan committee. I don't think it's up to us to, we can certainly, give comments about it, but from what I could see from what Malden did, they basically took some subset of a master plan group and did the analysis, and now you have something you can stand on, right? And you can make changes where you need to, and you can point to the facts. And if people want to rebut it, that's fine, but we have something. So it was very enlightening. So just to sum it up here, I think we need more hard data. I think, and because the environment's changing, and I think it has to come from the master plan committee. So if they want to put it off, that's fine. But I think the director and the staff would like to take a look at this analysis. So I'll send that on. So my feeling is I wouldn't do anything with this until we have some data and facts. Thank you.
Member Crohat, do you have any comments, questions?
Yes, thank you. Yep, my comments are pretty consistent with the chair's comments and Member McCamey, although I'm thinking about it in a little bit separate way, but still consistent with that. And my primary concerns, ways of thinking about it, really relate to the timing, the commercial zoning district piece of it, and the practical effect. So when we think about affordable housing, we can think about that in a lot of different ways, both the percentage of the adjusted median income, the subsidized housing index, and our 40B protection. And I have said before, and I'll say again, I really commend this administration on the gains that we've gotten to get to that 10%. I think that we've really shown a commitment to reach that, and that's very important to stay there. We all know that projects that come before the boards in the discretionary review that the zoning bylaws allow are better projects than what can be put forward otherwise. But from a timing perspective, my concerns are both what was previously commented about the master plan process, but also relates to the MBTA action plan and zoning guidelines. And so that action plan is due January 31st of this coming year, so in a few months. And just for a little bit of background, to the extent we haven't talked much about the MBTA guidelines, so that's something that was put in with the Housing Choice Act of 2020, and it requires towns that have a MBTA station, in addition to some other ones that are less relevant to Braintree, but an MBTA station, it requires the towns to put in a zoning district within a half a mile of the subway station that allows for a minimum density of 15 units per acre, which is the units still have to comply with the Wetlands Protection Act and septic requirements, so it could be less than that depending on what the property looks like. But the projects must also be approved without a special permit or variance, but they can be conditioned through the site plan process. So the requirement is there, but the penalty for not complying is that the town's no longer able to get funds through MassWorks or the local capital projects fund or the Housing Choice Initiative. And Braintree hasn't historically taken much money through the MassWorks, but that is the program that just got us, I think it was $2.5 million to upgrade Allen Street, which was obviously a much needed, and also supports the Allen Street project and all the affordable units that we're getting with that. So the question of inclusionary housing came up in the MBTA guidelines because the guidelines themselves don't say anything about inclusionary housing. And recent guidelines came out at the end of October that talked about how the two fit together. And DHCD recognized in their guidelines that excessive affordability requirements can make it, and they use the words economically infeasible to construct multifamily housing. So with that, they're requiring when these MBTA zoning guidelines get put in place that not more of 10% of the units can be affordable unless there's a third-party economic feasibility analysis done that demonstrates that multifamily can be developed at a higher affordability level within the district. And so my concern is that having this inclusionary bylaw go into place, it would conflict with any plans that Braintree takes to comply with that action plan in January, because if you have 10 or less units, I guess 9 or less units, you'd be over 10%, or 51 or more, you'd be over 10%. And so there's a potential conflict, and it could be that you write in the zoning district separate from this, but it seems more consistent to just have one plan that's put into place, and whether it's something different for this MBTA zone or whether it's something uniform throughout the town should be part of the discussion. But that's my timing concern with this, in addition to the master plan, which is really getting into the meat of the discussion of what we're looking for and what our vision for Braintree is, with input from all the different community members. My other real concern with the bylaw is that it takes multifamily housing out of the commercial zoning district. Right now, multifamily housing can go in commercial zoning by special permit only, which means that there's still a discretionary review. And that discretionary review can look at a number of things. We don't have a portion of our bylaw that allows us to demand affordable housing, but most of the projects that have gotten approved recently do require variances or some other additional relief that's allowed the town to negotiate affordable units within those, even though we don't have a bylaw. So I'm concerned that the commercial zoning would be taken out. Armstrong Dam, the site where the RMV is located, is a commercially zoned parcel. It's within a half a mile of the MBTA station. And there's been a lot of time, energy, and money put into improving the site with the Manataqua River there, and it seems like it makes a lot of sense for that site to be a mixed use or residential or whatever it looks like, but to not foreclose that possibility. And I do understand that there's some talks of working out whether that's the appropriate zoning for that parcel in that area, but my timing concern is also related to having this put in place before that conversation is fleshed out. And then just from a practical matter, the projects, I understand the landing is a separate, and that was before, but the very most recent projects that have gotten approved with the apartments that are on French Ave above Campanelli, sort of across from Shaw's, and the Hancock Street that hasn't been constructed yet, those the town was able to negotiate affordable housing even though there's not a bylaw. So I'm concerned from a timing standpoint with respect to our goals going forward as a town with the MBTA and with some of the other master plan process, that having this put in place and potentially conflicting with those could become a problem and potentially not lend that much of a solution to keeping us above the 10%, depending on what projects come down the road.
Member McCamey would like to ask a question.
Since Member Crowe is an expert in this, will the MBTA new rules, will they kind of be super rules above everything else? Will they have to guide it, or will there still be local content?
I am certainly not an expert, but I
Okay.
have read the guidelines. But
I can address that question. So, and I'm not an expert either, but I've been on several webinars and different discussions, and Crystal Huff and Connor and I have been talking about it and looking at it, and the MBTA community requirements, if this town was going to move forward with a district, would be a separate district. It would be a separate district that highlighted X amount of area within the rapid transit stations, and it would be sort of separated out from 705.
Thank you.
As a follow-up question, while we're on the topic of that, would this bylaw ride with whatever the MBTA communities did?
No, and jump in at any moment, Member Crowe. My read was up to 10% unless you already had something that was on the books. And I might not be 100% correct on that, but we don't already have anything on the books, so it doesn't really matter. Because that legislation and that all predates any adoption of, I think it actually said enacted. I don't have the text with me, but regardless, we don't have one, so we would be at that 10% unless we did the fiscal analysis to demonstrate that more was supported.
Yeah, I actually do have a memo from DHCD. It says, allow a community to require that more than 10% of the units in a project be affordable, provided that the community demonstrates that a reasonable variety can be feasibly developed at a higher percentage than it sounds like 10. So this may apply, but we're not sure if it would apply to the MBTA community zone.
Correct.
Okay. And then as a follow-up, just a question, because I had a similar question, and before I get away from Kim's comments. I forget the reasoning why we went, so highway, apartment house two-family, which is a outdated definition for this, with apartment houses, really. We used to have we used to have the multifamily say use, though not specifically worded that way, as a special permit in highway business and commercial. And this proposal removes it to not allowed. So no allowed use for multifamily or two-family in commercial, and no two-family in highway business. What was the background for those changes? I just don't recall that.
So we've, if I may, through the chair, we've been talking about doing this for quite some time. Nobody wants to hear about the comprehensive rezone, but we did have that in the comprehensive rezone. Couple different reasons. One, if you look at sort of aside from Armstrong, which we're targeting to rezone to highway business, again, thinking of in a mixed-use context, if you look at the ordinance and what's allowed in commercial and what's allowed in highway business, I don't think anyone's envisioning auto body, high bay garages, and contractor yards as mixed use. So most of our commercial areas are really not in the most residential promoting areas, and they would continue to create these conflicts that we have with zoning districts and industrial uses in the commercial districts next to residential. So like one of the examples was the piece at Graziano, and way before we permitted the development that has been recently permitted, they were talking about doing residential, and it's like the whole area is bound with roofers and oil companies and Means Precast and all of these businesses that would just start to create conflicts with that particular use in that area. So essentially trying to eliminate conflict and really trying to promote residential uses in areas that are a little bit more welcoming and in areas with uses that might not be residential but aren't necessarily industrial in nature. Because our commercial district is really like kind of an industrial district. And the highway businesses, you're more office, retail, restaurant, that type of use.
Great, thank you for that explanation.
You're welcome.
Member Grove, do you have any comments or questions or thoughts?
Yes, ma'am. I understand everybody's concern about the different details, but the details are going to change continuously. We need to make some sort of annual review process. I don't know if you want to include it in the bylaw or what.
When you say annual review process, do you mean like an analysis of like housing units?
The effectiveness of
The
it.
effectiveness
If
Is
we're
it-
doing too much so that it slows down the whole development
Yeah,
aspect. But
Yeah.
in saying that, I'd like to see the rates higher than the mayor proposed, because it's easier to step backwards.
sorry, I missed that. You'd like to see?
The 10, 12, 15,
Oh, the different percentages?
yeah, because I believe you're going to see the majority of the stuff in the 11 to 50 range. But if we do our review and we see things slowing down, we can always step back easier than if we see things just booming ahead, it's going to be difficult to increase it after the fact. So I'd rather increase it on the head end. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Grove. Member Connolly, any comments, questions, thoughts?
I had a question for staff. Is it possible for us to move forward to Town Council with a recommendation for the additional study in line with what Member McCamey has suggested?
I think that any recommendation from the board is appropriate. I don't think that anything is inappropriate. Favorable, unfavorable, no recommendation, favorable with, though, I think those are all acceptable. And and just to kind of elaborate a little bit, I do understand where the board members are coming from, and I haven't done a Malden level study, but I did go back and look at some of the projects that we've permitted here over the last 20 years. And I can tell you that all of those projects, and they range from 40Bs to things that were approved by this board, that all of those projects, except maybe 2, exceed the density requirements in 705. And quite a few of them, some 40Bs, some of the local ones that Member Crowe had spoke of, have affordable components. So we have been operating in this kind of hybrid of projects coming in, negotiating, and working something out, and then it makes its way, or at least talking about that and getting that in front of the boards and also in front of the zoning board in several of these cases. And I looked at some of the more recent ones, to Member Grove's point, economics today, tomorrow, 10 years from now. I mean, we all know that's going to change. In these percentages, a lot of them were over 10%, what we had required, and then some were under 10%. So we're kind of all over the place. 2 of the more recent ones, French Ave, Bill Frazier's project, and then also a home ownership product on Independence Ave, Tom Fitzgerald's project. And both of those projects have been completed. You know, do I call people up and say, you know, how much did you make? But the units are all filled. The affordable units are all filled. So, you know, I think a measure of success is people living in quality housing and being able to have access to goods and services and have rents or mortgages that are within their means. I think people could come up with 10 reasons to move on this and 10 reasons not to. And I think that the most compelling reason to me is to protect the work that we've done. Mayor Kokoris and myself have been working on various things, and keeping that 10% safe harbor, I think, is enough of a reason to move forward on something. We might have different implementation goals and outputs from the master planning process that change this. We could have a recommendation that talks about this study from that some of the board members, Darrell had started with, and Member Conley, and then we overhaul this. But I think that getting something on the books now, I would hate for the town to make the mistake that they made almost 20 years ago, and that was not moving forward on something. Bylaws can change, circumstances can change, and I think that there's no harm in moving forward with something right now. We talk about slowing down and different things like that. Well, we don't have anything on the books now, and I don't see people busting down the doors to do all kinds of residential development. We've had some, when you think about it, relatively small projects, 15 units, 30 units. When you talk about housing and you talk about multifamily housing, those are fairly small projects. But there were good projects for Braintree in those areas, not negative when I use the word small. So I think, you know, I know the board, some of these concerns have been raised on multiple occasions, and concerns about the MBTA communities and stuff, but I really think that we should try to move forward with something. And as far as the study goes, I'm not sure that's something that, you know, the mayor would have to take under advisement. I'm not sure if that's something that he is interested in moving forward with at this time. But if the board makes a recommendation and includes something like that, I will obviously be talking to him about that.
Thank you.
Member
Sorry.
Connolly, did you have anything else you'd like to ask or comment on?
Information, and I think it's important for this to move forward with a note for our concern about the economic feasibility, and that to be something for the council to take up in their discussions and deliberation. There's probably always going to be a reason not to move it forward, but I think that lets it get to the next level, lets it get to a directly elected body, and gives them the opportunity to consider it.
Member McCamey, did you have anything else you'd like to
And
add?
I agree with Member Conley, that the town council should take a more active role. My point about the study is, just take a look at it.
I know what you're talking
Yeah.
about, because Malden just went through this massive thing and they
Right.
passed it, the bylaw maybe last year when we first
And
started this.
It's almost like, you might look at it quickly, and we could put a few variables in, and I think they look a lot like this, which is fine. Again, it just seems to me if we have this, like you were just, the director was just saying, I don't see anybody breaking the doors down to put something in. So, I don't know if there are other plans, maybe somebody's got some ideas, but, I know we need to get something, but, okay, so that's my only thing, just take a look at it.
Yep.
Quickly. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Member McCamey. Is there anybody from the public who would like to come up? Yes. Thank you, former Counselor Sasha. If you could just state your name and address for the record, and happy to have you here this evening.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Steve Shasha, Hollis Ave, and I am in favor of this for the record. I hope you will indulge me to go through a couple of points I wanted to raise, because this is now the 1-year anniversary of this amendment coming before this board. I have not said anything for the last couple of months, but I did want to comment on some of the things that were said. First, the notion that this would make development more difficult. That's true only to the extent that everything in our bylaw does that. We routinely ask property owners to set aside 100-foot wide swaths of their property with open space to protect neighbors. We routinely ask property owners to set aside 10, 20, 30% open space because there's a greater public need for that. This is no different. There is a public need, and there has been a public outcry to manage the town's affordable housing, asking property owners and developers to set aside a small bit of their development to accommodate that is not too much to ask. This is not something that has been made up by the mayor or the town council or the residents. This is something that has been implemented in almost 100 other communities in Massachusetts. In the 80s, the state required 10% subsidized housing, and this is the standard practice for at least partially reaching that goal. Now, Braintree has fallen completely behind, and we've had to go down other avenues to get to 10%, but if we're going to maintain percent, this is the tried and true method for doing that other towns have demonstrated works. As Director Santucci-Razzi pointed out, we have had developments with over 15% affordability. One of the things that I would point out is that we have almost created a two-tiered system where we set different requirements for out-of-town investors than we do for local property owners. We tend to think about developers and property owners as all the same, but they're not. If you look at our subsidized housing list, it's Braintree Housing Authority, it's 40Bs, it's nonprofits, and it's local developers. It's Riccardi and Fraser and Messina, right? You don't have the big Arista out-of-town multi-million-dollar investment pools coming in and offering to do affordable housing. This would, if anything, level the playing field for local developers. While there have been some successes in negotiating affordable housing, it is 8 total units in the past 12 years. 8 units out of almost 1,000 that have been built. And that's less than 1% of the housing units created. It has brought our total down from 9.7% to 9.2%. Think of what a difference it would have made if we had had an ordinance like this on the books during that period, right? Even just look in the landing where there's no affordability at all, what a difference that would have made. You know, this, the last point I'll make on this before I address some specific comments made by members is that by not having this on the books, we have asked taxpayers to make up the difference, right? We just spent $2.25 million of taxpayer money subsidizing apartments in Windjammer to make up for the lack of affordability around town. We have sold a town property partly because we need the money, but partly to get this kind of development. And if you go back to our original master plan from 1998, the vision for that property was an amphitheater so that the public can have a waterfront place to see shows. And now it's going to be apartments, partly because we did nothing about affordability. As far as specific comments, Member Croha, you mentioned today the MBTA, the master plan. But going back through your comments to November of last year, you have come up with a different reason in every single meeting why we should delay or withdraw this amendment. In November, you said 40R and other smart growth strategies would be preferable. In December, you questioned the appropriateness of doing this with the work going on with the master plan. In March, you said we should revisit townwide densities and mentioned that there have been other towns that have done overlay districts. Now, I would also point out there that the apartments that you're citing, both 44 Allen Street and all of Bill Frazier's properties, are in overlay districts. That's why they've been granted variances, and 44 Allen Street didn't even need a variance because Braintree Landing specifically bypasses Section 705. You know, as far as MBTA housing, well, first of all, there is no zone in Braintree that would currently comply with the draft requirements, not one. That includes commercial and the Armstrong property. Also, the Armstrong property is not within a half mile of the MBTA. Less than 1 acre of that 27-acre parcel is within a half a mile. It's 0.64 acres. So even if you made that whole property part of the MBTA community strategies, it would not count as that being within a half an acre. I know you.
I don't want to get in about the MBTA communities. It's new. I understand your points, but there are some things in there that allow area to be out of that half mile.
Yes, half of it has to be within a half
Yeah.
mile, half of it does not.
Yeah.
But that property is not within a half mile. Even if,
Some of it is.
yeah, less than 1 acre would count towards the area that has to be within a half mile. The rest of it could count towards the part that does not have to
Right.
be within it. But literally any property in town could qualify for
Right.
that. So there's nothing special about this property other than that 0.64 acres that applies to
Understood.
MBTA communities. Okay, in May, you actually made 2 separate calls to withdraw this amendment because you said the purpose of the bylaw are to promote housing, and I've said before and I'll say again, there's nothing in the bylaw that does anything to really promote housing in and of itself. But you know that that is not the purpose of this amendment. The purpose of this amendment is to increase the housing supply of stock that is permanently available to and affordable by low and moderate income households. It is to encourage greater diversity of housing and is to develop and maintain a satisfactory proportion of the town's housing stock as affordable. It is not to promote housing. It doesn't promote housing. It doesn't do that at all. And to suggest that it should do that and therefore it should be withdrawn is, is questionable. And then in October, you went back to the MBTA communities, which we already addressed. Member Joyce, you have repeated some of Member Croha's false information, like in May when you said the goal of this amendment is creating housing and as such, hopefully affordable housing. It is not. The goal of this is specifically to create affordable housing. I really can't see how it could promote housing. There's nothing in here that does that. Last month, you questioned, is this the forum to have it here? I'm just concerned that it's going to get lost in the process. So, you know, I know that this board has received a lot of positive feedback from residents on this. I would also point out that this amendment has already gone, or a 15% inclusionary amendment has already gone through the town council. It sat on the town council agenda for probably close to a year while it went through multiple ordinance and rules hearings. So it had multiple public hearings, and in that process, with a straight 15% inclusionary requirement, every single member of the Ordinance and Rules Committee, representing Districts 1, 2, 6, and at large, which means that every single resident of Braintree was represented there, voted favorably on this amendment. This was in front of the resident working group, and you had a member of that group get up here and say, as it relates to the master plan, the general feeling was on a lot of big changes, we really needed to wait, but on this, and there were a number of matters that we looked at, the universal recommendations, we should make changes right away because these things could not wait. This is probably the most publicly reviewed amendment that has ever come before this board. So why is it taking a year of debate? You know, I really have to question. Member Joyce, you have said repeatedly, master plan before any zoning changes. That was in December. In March, you said, moving forward with the master plan, we still don't know what the town wants. In May, you said the master plan is underway. But you are the representative for this board to the master plan steering committee. And during the past year, you have never brought this to the steering committee. You have never raised this at a steering committee meeting to be discussed. And during that time, we've already gone through the public input process. We've had input from 2,000 residents through surveys and meetings to ask what they wanted, and we never asked them about this. So is the fact that a year has gone by and the master plan committee has not done anything with this a reason to continue to delay this? Or is it a reason to think that your performance as the master plan steering committee representative is not up to par?
Well, I will thank you for your commentary. I find it incredibly disrespectful to you stand up there and question my board member, Kim Kroha, who is a professional attorney and has expertise in this. And yes, she has brought up very many different reasons why we should be carefully considering the affordable housing bylaw and why it should be a collective effort. I have made it a point to attend every single master plan steering committee meeting. I went to the 4th of July event at the high school and listened to people talk about what they want. People do want Braintree to talk about housing. They do want affordable options for their families to live and continue to live in Braintree. And I think you've laid out the perfect epitome of why this conversation is so complex, and it brings up multiple reasons why it feels like Director Santucci-Razzi said it this evening the most perfectly way she could have. We are kind of all over the place on this. We have a need in our community to talk about housing, whether that's a vision that we're always forever a single-family housing community, whether that's a vision that we are an MBTA community and we embrace our location by the train and we have housing for people. We are in a position where we're talking about it. Now, on the Master Plan Steering Committee, I have not brought this up because, one, I've been listening and not, this to me, this policy in and of itself doesn't build housing. You're right, it doesn't build housing. It doesn't build affordable housing. It doesn't build anything. A policy is just a policy. It needs to work along with having land to build it on, having capital available to build it, having people interested to build it, and having market feasibility. Like, a policy in and of itself doesn't build housing. I think because we are kind of all over the place, I see a method of thought that is, we're at 10%. Let's not fall back on former mistakes of not staying on top of that. Let's move this forward. I think my board collectively has tried to have that conversation about all the details that make this a successful policy, that get us the goals of what a lot of people are talking about. We had a ton of letters initially when we posted this. We had a bunch of form letters, we had lots of different reasons, and there was a lot of interest, and it has died off. And I think it's just becoming so confusing, like, how do we stay on top of our 10%? How do we manage I'll call it a threat of a 40B, though I think that's kind of extreme. How do we capitalize on this MBTA communities? How do we keep funding sources available to us? How do we stay financially well off as a community? And this plays into all of that. And I think all we're trying to do with our expertise and experience is point out ways in which we could be more thoughtful, or we could consider other options and how it plays into development as a whole. It's so important to get it right because we want people to afford to be in our community. We want diversity in housing. We want this inclusionary housing bylaw to be successful. We want to increase the supply of housing stock in the town of Braintree that's affordable. We want to encourage greater diversity of housing accommodations to meet the needs of the residents. And we want to develop and maintain our SHI. Like, those are all things we want. I think we all have taken a lot of time to pore over that and what that means. And I don't think we're delaying it for any other reason that we're just, I mean, I'm personally not sure that this policy does that alone. And I don't think it's too much for our board to ask whoever has the power, whether it's the mayor's office, whether it's town council, to look at it in a bigger picture. We're talking about it in the master plan. We have consultants with expertise on housing in the master plan. Like, why don't we just take a step back from this one version that we're looking at and think of it collectively, tie it into, the zoning working group. Yeah, right, they did say the 15%, but that wasn't the only thing they said. They talked about a housing production plan, they talked about affordable housing trust, like there were other elements. We haven't talked about that. So I just think that we should do our due diligence to get it right. What is the hurry? We've gotten to 10% without it. Like, it's so important to keep the conversation going and get it right. And I think that's why you hear this like pause and commentary from the board. And I appreciate your commentary this evening, but I did find it a little aggressive to be so condescending to both Member Croa and myself. I mean, we're volunteers like you, and we have our own background of professional experience that's different than each other. We all bring that to the table, and to be called out in that nature of like, oh, you're changing your mind or you're saying this stuff, like, we're just trying to do the best thing for Braintree. And obviously we're not going to all agree on it, but I think we all want this to work. We all want this, like, we're just disagreeing on how to get there. And I don't think it's too much to ask for a more thoughtful analysis to be done.
Okay, so if I can finish though, the problem with that is that this is an order from the mayor and the town council, meaning every elected official representing every citizen of Braintree has decided that they want to discuss this amendment now. They wanted to discuss it a year ago. What's holding it up is this board.
And I think that is what we're hoping to do tonight, is move it away from our board and put it back into the hands of the town council in whatever format we decide to do that this evening. It is the mayor presented it to town council as part of their process. I don't think we've heard how they're vetting it. It's still got to work through their process. It's before us waiting on a recommendation. And I agree, we should make a recommendation and we should move it along. And I think we're trying to do our best to make a recommendation that we feel like will be helpful to the process, but it's complicated. And I don't think any of us are purposefully trying to derail this, because I do realize how important it is, and there is a lot of conversation around it. So I think that's where we're trying to get to tonight.
And that would be great, but you can understand, since the two of you, I'm specifically focusing on you because you have been publicly advocating against this amendment in other venues.
I don't want.
Like the Civic Association and online.
I did attend the North Braintree Civic Association meeting. And I guess I didn't intend to speak against it or for it. I think I'm wanting there to be a more collective conversation about what this bylaw is and what this bylaw isn't. And I think that we don't understand as a community what it is and what it isn't, because we haven't had a chance to discuss it in a more meaningful way.
Okay, but again, we have, because it's already been through a year of public hearings here and multiple public hearings at the town council.
Can I?
Yes, please,
If
Director
I may,
Santucci-Razzi.
through the chair. Mr. Sasha, what public hearings are you talking about with the council? Because that's not in line with the process for a rezone. That was never advertised as a public hearing.
Yes, it was. Not this version of the amendment. The original version of amendment, which was just 15% across the board inclusionary for 6 or more units, was already at the town council.
But there's no, when a zoning application is filed, the town council cannot hold a hearing until the planning board provides their recommendation. So I don't understand how hearings were had and it went to all these committees without, the planning board never received that.
It went to the town, yes, they can. They can and they did. It went from the town council to ordinance and rules. Ordinance and rules brought it to you and Solicitor Taub, at which point the mayor took it over.
Right, but those were not advertised public hearings, respectfully.
Sure they were. Anything that goes to Ordinance and Rules Committee is part of the agenda, and it was on the town council agenda.
That's different. On the agenda and a public hearing are two different things, in my world. I just want to clarify.
Oh, I understand what you're saying,
Okay.
yes. But it is a public hearing that the public participated
It's a
in and was
public
fully
meeting.
advertised, and it was a public hearing.
Okay, I don't want to get into it. That's not a process that I'm familiar with in any world, so.
I think your time is up, your point's been made. Respect is something earned. They've earned it. I personally have heard enough of this ad hominem attacks. I think we know you want to get it passed. If you don't have anything else to say, I'd ask you to sit down.
Well, I do have more to say.
Well, what do you have to say that's new and different, other than why don't you people vote on it? That's all I'm hearing. We want to have a thoughtful discussion. We've had it. It's complex. You know it is. If you don't have anything more to say, I respectfully, please sit down.
Okay, I will continue then. That was just about it, actually, but I would like to make one more point that is more of a point of order and is not specific to this amendment. A member of this board brought up the term limits requirement of this board under Chapter 41, Section 181A. I would also point out that that chapter requires annual elections for a chairperson for this board. Now, Member Joyce was made the chair in November of 2020, so tonight would mark the 3rd year of her chair of this board with no annual election. That's it. Thank you.
All right. I think that we all are very passionate about the future Braintree that we all want to be in. And I think we should be thoughtful about the policy we're creating. And I think we should be thoughtful about the process through which we create the policy. And I think we should take into consideration the master plan and the MBTA communities. And I think I don't find harm in raising questions around important issues that we all find, different issues with that. And I think we should look at the financial aspect of what we do. I think this evening it would be good to move this off of our board and onto town council to take the next steps, or whatever members of the board feel like is appropriate. I think we've had a lot of good conversation, and I'm proud of what the board has talked about and the questions raised, and I know a lot of time and effort went into understanding this complex issue. And, whatever direction this goes in, I know we'll all be engaged to continue to make Braintree the place we all want to be in. So if there isn't any other commentary, I think we could move to close our public hearing on this item this evening.
I would just like to make one
Member Crowe.
short
Sure.
clarification
Yep.
to some of the comments that were raised. My positions have been consistent since the beginning, and I did raise density as part of the broader conversation. I have not been opposed to this amendment so much as I have been interested in having a broader conversation about what it means to create housing stock in Braintree, both generally and affordably, because you can't create affordable housing if you're not creating any housing, unless you're buying units, of which this doesn't have anything to do with. I believe the only time I mentioned anything about this bylaw online was when former councilor Sasha called me out specifically in his posts to say that I was inherently unqualified to be on the board because I am an attorney who represents developers, owners, and affordable developers. Of course, that has nothing to do with the 14 years I've lived in the town, or the time that I'm giving up with my family to be here, or the work that I'm giving up, because I'm sure, as he knows, I can't represent developers in Braintree because of this position. So I did want to clarify that. I am consistent in my comments. I do agree it's time to move this on. I also want to clarify that a lot of the continuance requests did not come from this board, and so I think that we all agree that it is time to move it on and have a broader conversation, and so that's all.
So we do need a motion to close the public hearing.
Motion to close the public hearing.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? All right, the public meeting portion of this is closed for us. Is there a correspondence that we would need to enter in? Is that?
No, we don't
that
do
doesn't really-
correspondence
yeah.
lists on the town council orders, Madam Chair. I don't even want to do them on the other ones, but they might just,
Yeah.
Point of clarification, Madam Chair. I'll ask the director, what are our options in terms of going forward? Just given the fact that, there still is more to be studied, there's, more to listen to other people about, so on and so forth. So, and really, this does belong with the town council. So what would you like to see from us here?
So I think, and I want to thank everybody for their comments this evening, and really getting into this, because that's really what it takes. So the board could make just a straight up favorable recommendation. They could make an unfavorable recommendation. And they could also make a more detailed, so unfavorable because of this, or favorable with the following. And I'm not making a motion here because that's not my responsibility at this particular meeting. But kind of listening, it sounds like a favorable motion conditioned on the study of A, B, and C. I am not familiar enough with the study that was done in Malden to have specific words, but it sounds like it's around, feasibility, and, mostly feasibility, I would think. A sort of a feasibility and not a market study, but kind of in those terms of, is this something that works? And to remember Joyce's point, if you're not producing housing, you're not producing affordable housing, unless we're doing some of the other creative things that we've done here. So it sounds like that's what I heard this evening. And if I'm wrong, please correct me. But I think the board could summarize something around that, and I could prepare that a little more detailed and share that with the board. But I'm gathering, I could also, the motion can be very simple, and I can add, I will share the minutes with the council, and also I can kind of summarize the concerns that the board has raised over these proceedings that began in March. And if I'm wrong, tell me if I missed something, or if there's something more specific we want to look at. But I think it's really does this work for Braintree? And if it's favorable conditioned on, and that turns out to be something different, then it's almost like an unfavorable recommendation, and if that's what you're intending. And whether or not the council, again, it's just a recommendation. So the council may feel as though that's not appropriate. I don't know what that costs. So I wouldn't be able to answer those questions this evening. But it kind of sounds like that's where folks, members of the board, are going.
Can I ask one?
Yes, please.
Yeah. So my other thought was, I'm just concerned, when we're talking about the details, particularly about some of the items that Member Crowe mentioned. I don't know how would we put that in there? I sort of feel like they're missing.
Well, again, I think that, when I send these reports to the council, sometimes it's a quick and fast thing, and but when there's discussion and there's public comment, sometimes we have a lot of hearings. That's like included, sort of gets into it, and then I give the actual recommendation. So in this particular case, we would provide the minutes as part of that recommendation, because those would outline. And actually, now that I think about it, I send the minutes, I usually send them the minute, every time, so that they can actually see, when you summarize something, it might not be exact, they can actually see who said what the concerns were. It's always better to kind of have it in that form than sort of paraphrasing, but I generalize in the actual report.
Do any board members have a thought on the motion this evening? Any comments, or do we want to talk about, I guess we could start off just by talking about if anybody does have any motions, and then, if there was like a motion to, like for a favorable recommendation, but we want to do a certain study, like what study, or like if we were, I guess, favorably recommending it with potential revisions, like we can start talking about that as a group if anybody wants to try to work up a motion that we can try to move forward on.
I could do a suggestion that, for discussion, it's not an official motion at this point, but the thought would be to have a favorable recommendation with 2 sub-recommendations. One, to remove the reference to the commercial zoning change at this time, and then the second, to make it consistent with the MBTA guidelines through either the
respectfully, I don't. I understand what you're saying, because they talk about in there. But I mean, we could get a copy of the, look, I'm not familiar as Member McConnell, but I know what he's speaking of. We could provide that. That was done as, in this exact context. You know, it's a different community, but it's the same type, it's different numbers and all that kind of stuff, different inputs, but, and we could provide them with a copy of that. Again, I would stay away from the MBTA community stuff, and I will, again, put my hat out for the commercial. Again, that's something separate from Armstrong totally, that is just not, we want to try to focus in certain areas and really try to keep that district what it is, which is essentially industrial. So sorry, but that's just, if that's what the board votes on, then obviously I would forward that along, but.
I understand what you're saying about the change in the district principal uses. I think I don't feel like we've been able to vet it enough to remove it completely from those commercial zones. So I think if we were to make a favorable recommendation, I think I would be more inclined to just keep it as special permit for those instead of changing them to no. But again, that would be just kind of along the thought process of what we may be able to move forward on, or whatever makes the most sense. I think we need to, personally, I think we need to understand as best we can the impact this has to financial benefit or not benefit or redevelop, like how does it play into the development that the town is most likely going to be challenged to accommodate in the future, especially given the financial, the financial issues that are looming. I think we need to be really careful about putting something on the books that may have a financial. I know we won't be able to have a crystal ball to foresee the future, but I think a feasibility study to make sure that, you know, what number of development units is large enough to absorb the requirement and doesn't, you know, economically do something we don't want it to do. So I think
Can I
how
play
we
out
could
a couple scenarios here, and I understand what you're saying, but that measure is different in every single scenario. And we'll talk about, I'll take Armstrong Cork. Like, that property has been owned, I mean, who knows what they even paid for it. They've owned it for so long, so the economics at that site are very different than economics at other sites. So that's not going to be a one size, again, I don't know the specifics of Malton, it's not going to be like sort of a one size fits all. There will be some general analysis of, like, I think you're looking at like cost of construction per square foot, like, you know, looking at that and how that sort of plays into, you know, I think the reality is that the, you know, the affordable units they're a wash. Or at least that's my experience in looking at various forms of, and that's where the, you know, where the density comes into play. I mean, there's a lot of factors here, and we haven't brought density into this discussion, and that isn't anything that's on the table as part of this, but it's related. And, you know, I don't think that the community is quite ready to talk about that. And I think that if we can put something together this evening that moves this along, and if we want to leave it generic, you know, I was just kind of jotting notes as everybody's talking, to complete a study to determine the feasibility of this ordinance on Braintree's market and affordable housing production. I mean, that's kind of, I think, what I heard, but I think we should keep it fairly simple, because this could turn, this could, you know, you you could end up with a report this big, and you could end up with something that says, at this size development, you could do more, and at this size development, you should do less. Something very simple. So I don't want to try to, it already seems very complicated, and I can kind of, not read minds, but I know this board, and I kind of sense that you kind of know what you want, but you don't want to go crazy and get too detailed into it, but you want a comfort level knowing that this is going to be something that if you support, that you can get behind, I think.
If I could make a suggestion. I think the director, if she looked at the Malden report, it would take you 10 minutes. And you'd race through it, and it just is where do we have differences? I just thought it was complete, and it actually had numbers.
Yeah,
So-
and I'm sure you're right, it's just no one's had a chance to look at that,
Sure.
and I just don't want to project something without at least having seen it and reviewed it and be able
Well,
to.
that's why I wanted to send it around to everybody.
Yeah.
So now we're at this point. So I think that, I'll speak for myself. We would like to have inclusionary housing. Maybe the way to word it is, if we move favorably, that we believe that additional study is needed in the following areas. Some of the items that Member Crowe talked about, I know you want to leave out the MBTA, that's looming over this, however. Financial statistics, and certainly density issues. And the only other thing I saw in the Malden report is that they looked like they were thinking about a little flexibility, in lieu of fees. Again, I couldn't quite figure that out in a short period of time.
Yeah, I had that question from other people, and respectfully, when you look at Malden, who has a redevelopment authority and
Right.
probably 20 people in their housing division, we have a capacity issue here, and respectfully, I don't think that we should get in the business of holding money and then going, what are we doing with this, as we're falling further and further behind. I know some communities have large pots of money, and frankly, if you don't spend those dollars, we're talking about feasibility, if you collect money in 2020 and it takes you 10 years to get enough, and then you're dead in the water. So I really don't think we should go down that road. I think we should be chipping away as we go and having it spread out, integrated in various developments, a little bit of everything.
Okay, so one other thing, I think Member Grove's correct, which is partly what I said. How do we know this is going to work? How do we know this is going to work? And we need to have a check. So what's the process? Those are the things that I would think about. And, I'm happy to pass them on to the town council. But, there's still a lot of these issues. I don't think they're resolved.
Madam Chair?
Yes, Member Connolly.
I think we could make a favorable recommendation for the zoning ordinance as amended with the condition of the inclusionary zoning feasibility study being conducted. I think that gives us sort of a broad recommendation. It allows the council room within it and would help us to move this forward.
I think that is a positive way to move forward. I think having an inclusionary housing bylaw is very important, but we need to ensure that it performs, that we have some ability to monitor how it's performing, and that we have done our due diligence from a town finance perspective, and some of the other things that we've talked about, just that feasibility, that it works for us. I think in its current form, it may be perfect. I think we need more information to determine that. So I think in sight of wanting to encourage this conversation to keep happening and to open it up into the realm of town council, I think the the comment to, you know, look at moving it forward favorably with the, you know, the thought to have that additional study, as both you and Member McCamey have stated. I think, you know, I think that's a good summary of where I feel like we're at. So I think that is most likely something that I could personally get behind, and we can continue this conversation for sure. Do you want to make that motion, or do you want to add anything to it?
I had a question for staff. What sort of provision can we put in for consideration and monitoring of this, like moving forward, to Member Grove's question? He wanted to see if there was review that could be conducted on an annual or, you know, multi-year cycle.
I wouldn't recommend putting that in an ordinance. Yeah,
Right.
I really wouldn't. So, I mean, we've gone how many years without one unit? So, I mean, we're not talking like, you know, you're gonna see, I don't think there would be an instance where you wouldn't see the application. And at that time, when you issue a decision, is where you would put in place, that, would it be like you would wanna look at a particular project? Is that what you would wanna do?
The question I had heard from the group was, it was how would you, over time, see if this was working? And was it just something that would have to be brought up?
So like reviewing the projects that it was applied to? I guess I'm not quite.
Reviewing the ordinance itself. So that would just be a natural process if it was brought up under concern, or?
Is there a way to effectively monitor or appropriate to monitor?
But that would be looking at the projects. Like, how would you look, maybe I'm not following.
I think it would just have to be another zoning amendment to change it. But I don't know how we could add it in to the bylaw necessarily. I mean, we could internally put on our agenda in a year. I think I'm getting the question to just take a look and see what projects have been proposed, and does it appear that this bylaw has made a difference in the projects that are coming forward? I think
Yeah, that's something that like, you could just say, Melissa, you know, next month, or put this on the agenda, tell us the or is it more specific, like you want the developer to come and say, yeah, I did this and I did that, and is it that level, or is it just kind of a synopsis of what's actually been done? Because the planning board can ask that at any point. And we actually track quite a bit of stuff. I've got more data than anybody is interested in. Well, some people might be interested in it, but no, if you want, like, if, let's say, something is passed and it's next year this time, and just, Melissa, can you put on the agenda and just give us an update? And I can say, we've had no applications, or we've had 30, we've produced this many units, this many rental, this many, but that, I mean, that's, is that what you're thinking? Because that can be requested at any point.
Madam Chairman, when I was expressing that, I was looking at the overall effectiveness of the bylaw in terms of creating the housing and any financial impacts.
Yeah, so it involves the developers then? Because I don't have people's, P&L statements every month, so. And again, you can put conditions in permits that say, we'd like you to come back in a year and tell us, what's going on. I don't know if people are gonna divulge their personal financial information, but they can talk in general, if that's what you're looking for. But I think any of those, number one, I don't think it belongs in the ordinance, and regardless, if it's me coming with this many projects and an update, the board can ask for that at any point. And if it's to hone in on a specific project, we can include those in conditions. We've done that before. We've done that before.
So if we were to discuss a favorable movement of this with the additional information, would you, I guess, if somebody wants to make that motion, if we could just include any potential specific revisions that you might have to this version, if there's anything specific that you might find beneficial, make that at the same time as the recommendation, just so we can capture it all at once. And if it's just as is, that's fine too. But happy to entertain a motion if someone would like to make one.
I'll start. And apologies to the director, I'm going to add back in the commercial thing, and the board members can vote on it however they see fit. But my motion would be to submit a favorable recommendation to town council with an economic feasibility study that would allow them to have additional data on how this bylaw may operate while they're crafting the final version, and to remove the...
Can you slow way down? So I'm at favorable with economic feasibility.
I have to remember what I said. Okay, so that the...
Louise is at home, like, typing this math.
So that the council can have additional data to ensure that whatever version they ultimately vote on supports the purposes that it intends to produce.
All right, let me just write and then I'll read it. Favorable to economic study.
And to remove the change in commercial district.
Favorable with economic feasibility study from the council. Okay. A favorable recommendation with an economic feasibility study for the council to provide data to determine if the ordinance as drafted will function as stated in the purpose.
Yeah, so I was thinking, in the event council makes any changes, so as drafted or as they may revise based on the feasibility. But I think the way that you worded it, I think the way that it's written incorporates the thought of the economic feasibility analysis.
Do you want analysis or study?
Should we specifically reference as an example I think it may be helpful just to reference the document Member McCamey referred to as like what we were thinking as something similar.
Yeah.
I think we want to ensure that it achieves what it says its purpose is and is also financially makes sense, which is what the feasibility study
Right. That
would do.
Okay, but all right, okay. These aren't really like feasibility measures per se, like the purpose, but I think like, yeah.
Right. Basically, the point being to get the feasibility study to make sure that the percentages are in line with actually creating permanently affordable housing in Braintree. If the analysis came back and said the market can support a higher percentage at lower units, or if the analysis came back and said it doesn't support the 15%, basically the analysis would be looking at the bylaw percentages and remaining provisions with the thought in mind of why are we doing this? We're doing this to maintain the 10% and to build affordable housing that that is counted towards a subsidized housing inventory.
Madam Chair? The feasibility study would likely be an inclusionary zoning study and not an economic feasibility study. That would be a more comprehensive look, and I think more in line with what we're asking them to do.
Okay, so you would change the wording of feasibility study to inclusionary zone?
I would
sorry.
say inclusionary zoning instead of economic.
Okay, inclusionary zoning feasibility study.
That's the
Yes.
study.
Yeah.
So a favorable recommendation with an inclusionary zoning feasibility study for the council to provide data to determine if the ordinance is drafted will function as stated in the purpose. Because the council can make any changes they want to it,
Yeah.
based on that,
Yes.
with it, without it,
Yes.
like they can
It's
modify
absolute-
whatever they want. Okay.
Yes.
Right, yeah.
Yes.
And then for the SP to stay in commercial.
Yes. Is that
Yes,
right?
yes, yep, that would be the motion.
All right, so we do have a motion by Member Crowell. Do we have a second on that motion?
I'll second the motion.
All right, we have a second by Member Connolly, so that we can go to a vote. All those members in favor, please say aye. Aye. All those opposed? All right, that is our recommendation to move forward to Town Council. Thank you.
You're
Thank
welcome.
you.
I'm going to put together a pretty extensive report with the minutes, and I will put this together, and then I can circulate it, and
be
everyone
great.
can take a look at it.
That'd be
Probably
great.
won't be till next week.
Great, thank you. All right. We will now be able to jump back into our old new business section of the agenda, and we are at, I'm going to go right in order here. So I have Registry and Land Court Planning Board membership forms.
So, Madam Chair, we need to send signatures and membership of the board to both the Land Court and the Norfolk County Registry of Deeds. Member McCamey is our clerk and signs quite a few sets of plans, and that's what's noted on here. So if the board could make a motion to just confirm that Darrell is the clerk of the board, that's what it says on here, and then we'll just circulate these for signature.
All right, so those are being passed around for signature.
Excuse me?
Those are just going to be passed around for
Yeah,
signature.
and it basically says what I just said, confirming Member McCamey
Okay.
and that he can
Okay.
sign. Yep.
All right, very good. The next item on our agenda.
I need a motion.
Oh, a motion for,
Motion to confirm Member McCamey
okay,
as clerk
sorry,
of the board.
missed that.
Thank you.
Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Second by Member Connolly. All those in favor? Aye. All those opposed? Congratulations, Darrell, you get to stay as clerk. All right. The next item on our agenda is request for as-built approval and release of surety. We have two items on the agenda for this. The first one this evening that we'll take up is file number 05-06, which is 16 to 18 Pearl Street, McDonald's. I believe we have a representative on behalf of McDonald's here this evening. If you just want to just introduce yourself, and then what I typically will do is just turn it over to the director or assistant director to give a summary of where we're at, and then if we have any questions, you can be available to answer those. So if you just want to introduce yourself, and then I'll turn it over to them.
Sounds good. My name is Dan Allen. Work with Bowler Engineering as the civil engineer on the project, and here representing McDonald's, the applicant tonight.
Great, thank you very much. We do have a staff report. I don't know, was it Connor, did you work on that? All right, Connor, if you could just kind of give us an overview of what we're looking to do this evening, and then we can open it up to the board for comments.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Last month, I presented to the board with the request for as-built approval by the applicant. Staff did update the staff report that was distributed at the last meeting. Staff has worked with Bowler Engineering on sort of tackling this issue with the existing pavement. McDonald's, the franchisee, has submitted a written statement where they're going to be seal coating, seal cracking, and striping the entire site by the end of June 2023. Staff has recommended tonight that the planning board release all surety that's associated with the project, which is $25,000 in accordance with conditions 4 and 15, and then to continue the request for as-built approval to the July 11th, 2023 meeting.
All right, great. Member McCamey, do you have any comments or questions on this?
I do not.
Member Crowe, do you have any comments or questions?
I do not, thank you.
Member Grove, do you have any comments or questions? Member Connolly, do you have any comments or questions?
No, thank you.
I don't have any further comments or questions. I think with that, Chair can take a motion on the as-built approval and release of surety? Or
No,
just the release of surety?
Just the release
Just the
surety,
release of
please.
surety.
Yep.
Do we have a motion?
Excuse me?
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, so it was the surety and then the certificate of occupancy as well?
Correct. So we're working with the building inspector on the final certificate of occupancy. Tomorrow morning, I will be meeting with the building inspector and going through what the board decided and what's going to happen in the future.
Okay, so we just have to make a motion on the surety, and then you'll be working with the building inspector for the certificate of occupancy?
Correct, yep.
All right.
Gotcha.
Do we have a motion for surety release?
I'll move for release of the surety on project number 0506, McDonald's, 1618 Pearl Street.
And then do we also need to continue, in the staff report, continue to request the as-built approval to the July meeting? Do we want to do that
We
as
can include
well?
that in the motion as well, yeah, if you don't mind.
And continue
July 11th.
the report on, into July, July meeting? July 2013.
Yeah. All right, so we have a motion to release the surety and to continue the request for as-built approval to the July 11th, 2023 meeting by Member McCamey. Do we have a second?
Second.
We have a second by Member Crowe. All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? All right, so we release the surety, and Connor will work on the certificate, or the certificate of occupancy.
I'll follow up with Mr. Cranston tomorrow.
Perfect.
There's a little bit of leeway on the town side to get a check cut for the surety. And then I talked to the building inspector today, and I'll follow up with them tomorrow.
All right, great. All right, appreciate it, guys.
Thank you. The last item on our agenda this evening is a request for as-built approval and minor modifications, is that right?
Yes.
For 300 River Street, which is commonly known as East Middle School. I don't know, do we have anybody from the applicant side this evening?
From the mayor's office, Nicole Taub. We have some representatives from Samiotis, who is the engineer of record, and also from Hill International, who was the town's OPM. So I prepared a brief staff report. Let me just find my copy. That accompanies the very detailed memo that was submitted from Samiotis, and they're here this evening to go over those. There were some field changes that were made along the way, and those are going to be talked about this evening. I did have a couple other follow-up questions in regards to the existing drainage system. There was an inspection report completed pursuant to condition 25, and I'm curious if the recommendations in that report were actually completed. And then also looking for, this was going to be a kind of like a balanced site, and different materials were brought in. Our conditions require the volume, source, and type, so we need that. Copy of the snow storage plan, and this fall's O&M inspection reports to be submitted as well. So I was hoping tonight the applicant's engineer, Sammy Otis, could go over the changes that were made, and that if the board was comfortable with those, vote those as a minor modification, and also to grant as-built approval, conditional on receiving the items noted above in the analysis portion of the report. So fairly straightforward.
All right, so do we have someone this evening from Samiotis who would like to come up and,
And I have a full-size, sorry, the copies in the packet were kind of small, but I do have a full-size civil plan if folks want to follow along.
it's technically a survey. Thank you. It is, that's okay. Good evening. If you just would like to introduce yourself for the record and then jump right into it, that'd be great.
Absolutely. My name is Matthew Zaroli. I'm the representative from Samiotis Consultants. I've been on the project for probably about 3 years. I did not start on it, but I've carried it through. So looking at, it sounds like you're specifically interested in the modifications memo, which kind of summarizes the changes. So that memo dated April 7th, 2022. Going through, I think many of these I've flagged as minor changes that were basically going after the same design intent, so they didn't necessarily affect the overall drainage patterns or grading cut and fill analysis. And I would flag those items as section 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, section 7, 8, 10, 12, and 14. So each of those, essentially section 1, we changed a little bit of the landscaping area at the northwest side of the building, which adjusted the contours, but was a minor change to the slope and angles, and didn't negatively affect the drainage patterns. Section 2, crosswalk was adjusted for ADA purposes. Section 3, the landing and concrete stairs at the eastern main entrance were modified again for ADA purposes and to achieve the 2% maximum slope for patio. So again, you can see a minor change in elevation by about 3/10. Section 4, ADA spaces were moved from the north end of the parking lot due to the existing grades not meeting the 2% maximum slope required. Those spaces were moved to the south, so we replaced those in kind in a different location. And there was a conscientious effort by the design team to ensure that the flow patterns, walkways were protected and restriped. That's true of all the ADA spaces. Section 5, same thing, parking space layout was changed to accommodate the relocated spaces from section 6. And again, restriping was done to provide a better access pattern. Section 6, this walkway at the building entrance was widened by a request from the town to accommodate deliveries. So that did result in an approximate 160 square foot of added impervious area. However, based on the calcs, that does not negatively affect the design for the stormwater. Section 7 and Section 8, I believe, subsurface perforated French drains were added in both of the courtyards, and that was to address potential moisture issues along the foundation, and to essentially, ensure that there was no buildup of ponding or puddling within these enclosed areas. In the finished condition, these are essentially walled off on all sides, so it was just a way for the groundwater to filter out, and that did not negatively affect the infiltration calculations. Section 9, the westernmost field was regraded higher than originally designed per discussions with the town and the OPM and direction. At the north end of the field, the contour was adjusted by about 2 feet to be a little bit higher, and at the southern end, raised about 6 feet from 114 to 120. The additional fill change results in no negative impact to the site runoff or drainage patterns. I know that there is some discussion about overall import that might be affected by this, but in terms of site design, that did not negatively affect the infiltration and stormwater design. Section 10, based on some incidents that happened during construction with downstream silt migration and runoff flow, we installed permanent stone check dams on the main drainage swale at the northwest end of the site. And these were just designed to ensure that the flow going down that swale was slowed down. So it just was an additional protection and mitigation effort to ensure that that there was no runoff migration from the site. And this was done, again, in response to issues that came up during construction when the site was open and exposed. And since then, we haven't heard any negative issues downstream of the site. Section 11, stockpile was created on the north area of the site, again, by the direction of the town and the OPM. This change results in no negative impacts to our section of the site. An analysis beyond was not done, but there is no change to the infiltration or stormwater patterns based on that. Section 12, south of the building, again, this is a small ADA change. There was a Y intersection that needed to be adjusted and regraded because of slopes that were exceeding the ADA limit of 5%. So that was just really a minor construction change to ensure that the grades met the design intent and the ADA standard. No major changes to impervious area were incurred by that. Section 13, along the same walkway west of the Y intersection, we added an extended access ramp to the field. The design plans didn't originally have the walkway going all the way to the field, so we extended it so that there was a level landing for any ADA persons to be able to access the field. So that did no negative impacts, but there was probably a minor square foot adjustment of maybe 100 square feet added in impervious area. Section 14, the walkway accessing the southwest entrance was adjusted at the T intersection. Again, this was just a design change that came up during construction that we needed to adjust the grades to ensure that we had ADA compliant walkway. Section 15, the southwestern field was regraded to match the original design intent. Final grades were about 1 foot lower than the original design. This again resulted in no negative flow patterns. It was just an effort to make sure that the crown and the flows from the center of the field were meeting the design intent.
Great, thank you very much. So this evening, we're looking to grant as-built approval with surviving conditions, grant the modifications, which is what you just reviewed with us, correct? And then there are some items in the staff report that are items requested of you. Do we need to go through the items that are requested, or do we have that?
No, I think what, Madam Chair, if I may, I think a motion to approve the modifications, if that's the will of the board, and to grant as-built approval with surviving conditions as outlined in the staff report, conditional on receiving items 1 through 8 in the analysis. And that covers, they have a copy of the report as well.
So one, just while we are on the topic of as-built approval at East, I noticed, so condition 46 shall install the landscaping in accordance with the plans. I do think, and I didn't take any pictures, but it looks like some of the trees like near, like when you're in that new parking area and you're walking up towards the soccer field, some of the pine trees that are installed are looking pretty rough. So how should we determine if like those should be replaced, or if it's like within the scope of like making sure all the landscape that was installed is healthy and
So 40, let me just double check, 48, I believe.
Okay, not 49. Okay, that's a surviving condition.
Yeah, those are in the landscaping.
So
It's 49, Madam Chair. So they're required to replace anything annually that didn't survive.
So they are required, or we as a town are required? Because it does say the applicant and/or any successors. So I'm assuming that, right?
That's the school department.
The school department would?
Yeah, I mean, that property is under their care and custody.
I guess, just to make sure that they are turned over a healthy species of tree or whatever, like, is this the point where the tree should be healthy and then it's turned over to them as part of this as-built, or has that already kind of
Oh, I
happened?
think they're past that. I think they're past any planting guarantees. Yeah,
Okay, so
that's
any-
typically 1 year for the landscaper or the stock.
So the dead trees are now on the
they're-
building
yep,
department?
And just like any other
Okay.
property. We typically do that in the spring,
Okay,
because the winter usually is what, those are probably left over from last winter, maybe if they've taken. In general, when you're planting that many, there's gonna be a few that, might get a little crispier than others, and that's, proper care. I don't know what their maintenance plans are for landscaping over there. But those would be required to be replaced in the spring.
okay, so that's not really related
That's
to
one of
the
the
applicant.
surviving.
That's a surviving?
Yep, yep.
Okay, okay.
We tend to do like random audits on that. And when we call people up, it's cue the trees typically, so, yeah.
All right.
Things die and people just take them out, and then we go out and
Okay.
check and we get a replanting plan. We've
Okay.
done that with quite a few properties.
Thank you.
Yep.
Member McCamey, do you have any comments or questions?
Thank you, Madam Chair. As a recent graduate of East, I'm very ecstatic to see changes, including, because when my kids went, it was exactly the same as when I went, and I won't tell you when I went. But I voted there yesterday, it was great. So I think what I just simply like to know is, how is the water capture and total system working? Because, back in the day, it just came down off the hill. Fields, streets, down the hill. How's that all working now? Is everybody happy?
Yes, so we will, and we did notice in the analysis that there was a request for fall inspection reports, so we'll make sure that those are provided, retroactively if need be. But we haven't heard any issues downstream in my visits to the site. Really, last year and the year before, when it was in completion, everything looked like it was performing well. We do have a video report of the finished system, the piping and everything, and we, flagged any issues there. And the infiltration system itself was actually expanded during construction, just with sand, added sand due to the soils on site. And that was a big challenge that the construction faced, was just that it's a relatively silty soil underneath, and that led to some of the runoff issues, and it sounds like historical.
So what percentage of the water is actually captured?
I'd have to look at the analysis, but
A lot?
essentially, yes, a good portion of the proposed impervious, any change, any increase has to be captured and treated, and we have to ensure that the runoff in the post condition is better than in the previous. So
That's fantastic.
yeah, it's a lot better than whatever era may have been when your kids went.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. No. Thank you very much. Appreciate
Thank
it.
you.
Looks good. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Member Crowe, any comments or questions?
No, I will say I've noticed on my Saturday morning soccer field visits that it seems to be looking pretty good. But beyond that,
good
no
news.
comments. Thank you.
Member Grove, any comments or questions?
No, thank you, Madam Chair.
Member Connolly, any comments or questions?
No, thank you.
I don't have any further comments or questions, so I think with that, we can, based on the staff recommendation, if somebody would like to make a motion on this, please feel free.
If I can, Director, can I do it all at once? One
Yeah.
motion? Okay, all right. I'll give it a stab. Motion to grant the modifications as requested and to grant as-built approval with conditions identified on the staff memo.
Second.
Conditional on
Receiving the,
Getting-
Conditional on receiving the
1 through 8.
list.
we have a motion by Member Crowe. Do we have a second?
Second.
Second by Member Grove. All those in favor? All those opposed? Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. With that, that's the last thing on our agenda this evening. So, Member Grove, did you want to,
Have a little conversation about term of office for the planning board, and I noticed that the town solicitor was here.
Respectfully, that matter is not on the agenda. I would caution the board on discussing items that are not on the agenda.
This has been forwarded for 2 meetings now, Melissa.
I understand that, and it's under advisement, as I had shared at a previous meeting with town council.
Well, the problem with this that I'm visualizing is the longer this goes on, we're collecting a bunch of approvals and denials that may or may not be valid. So I'd like to urge a little response on this.
Good evening, everybody.
Thank
I am
you.
here this evening as it relates to the approvals for the East Middle School project. It's my understanding that this item does not appear on the agenda for discussion, and I would echo Director Santucci Razi's concerns about having any discussion with regards to that matter where the public has not been given proper notice in order to participate or observe the conversation. It is a matter we have discussed previously. It is a matter on which my office has given a preliminary recommendation on, and I would suggest that there is no concern with this body continuing to meet in its current form, and if the decision is made by the chair and the director to place the item on the agenda, at that point, either myself or Assistant Solicitor Huff would certainly be happy to participate in a discussion.
Great, thank you very much. If I could just ask a point of clarification, you can answer it if you want. What would be, if a member of this board wishes to put something on the agenda, what is the best method? I mean, it has been brought up during meetings a couple times, and I have heard this topic in other areas around town, so I think it may be worthwhile to put it on the agenda, but I also understand that the town is also looking at it through their lens. Like, I understand that there's process to this. So I guess just generally speaking, if a member of this board does wish to bring an item into the agenda, what is the best way to do that? Is it to file a formal request with the planning department and then wait for that to get put on the agenda, or just like a point of clarification with how a member might do that?
Typically, board members bring things to my attention. I do the agenda. I review it with the chair. This matter was brought to the board's attention. I've shared that with our legal department, and I have not received any direction to put it on an agenda for discussion. I'm not going to discuss it with the board because that's not my responsibility or my expertise. If Ms. Taub is willing to come and discuss it, then we can put it on an agenda.
Madam Chairman?
Yes, Member Grove.
I'd make a motion to place it on the agenda and continue to hold it on each subsequent agenda until it's resolved.
All right, is that appropriate for a member to make a motion to put it on the agenda? That seems, all right. So
If it's seconded and voted on.
Yep. So the motion would be to place on the agenda a discussion of term limits for board members. Is that what I'm understanding your inquiry to be?
Yep.
Okay.
And before this board votes, again, I would caution the board on voting on something that is not on the agenda.
Yes, and
As a discussion. Okay.
So I think this sounds like a motion to put something on the agenda, and I don't know the appropriateness to that. I don't know if anybody has any thoughts about that, but you're right, I don't think we should have a public discussion on this.
If I may, Madam
Yes.
Chair, I don't believe a vote is necessary to place an item on the agenda. I think traditionally, you as chair can set the agenda. So if you determine it's appropriate to place this item on a subsequent agenda, it's within your authority to do that separate from a vote of the board. I also share concern about voting on items that were not properly noticed under the open meeting law, and certainly happy to participate in a discussion once it's properly noticed, and also once my office has had an opportunity to complete its formal review on the question, since the previous discussions appear to have been insufficient on the matter.
All right, thank you for that. So I think that given the personal challenge made by a former member of the town council to me this evening about my validity as chair and the validity of our membership, I think, I think to put it on the agenda can publicly put it, assure us that we're operating in a legal and rightful way. And if there is anything that we need to do, I think we want to make sure that we are operating at the highest level. So I would be in support of putting it on the agenda. So I don't know the timing of that. Do you have a timing for which, like, if we put it on the agenda immediately for the next meeting, does that give you enough time? Or what do we feel would be appropriate on the timing of placing that on the agenda, hopefully soonish?
I would suggest, you're certainly free to place it on the December agenda, and then I would just have to consult with Assistant Solicitor Huff to make sure that one of us would be available and prepared for the discussion. If it looks like we're not, at least you have the item on the agenda for December, and you can certainly continue it if necessary into January.
Okay, great, thank you. I would like to put that on our December agenda, and I appreciate you stepping out of the hat you're wearing this evening to address this with us. Thank you very much.
Certainly, and I apologize for missing the beginning of the meeting. I was double booked tonight.
I'm sure, very busy. Thank you. All right, so that will be on our December agenda. With that, Chair will entertain a motion to adjourn. We have a motion by Member Grove. Do we have a second?
Second.
Second by Member Connolly. All those in favor? Aye. All those opposed? Good night, everyone.
Happy Thanksgiving.